anything. This doesn't go anywhere. This is just more world building, and it's like that. It's like to the. I mean, it's not that there's nothing to like in the old online chapters. I was actually I initially thought the hospital horrors were just like, it's just the thing from the games. They're here now, and there's a really uncomfortable thing with like the tentacles and Pip being worried that she's about to have a very bad time.
We've all seen enough hentai.
It's kind of, I just reading that and just getting like a sinking feeling. I was like, oh no. But I thought that was just all pointless fluff until there was like the audio log with like the person who had the accident with the barrels and just kind of turned into one of them, and it's just like, it's kind of
I have my note on that is Jesus Christ, how horrific.
It's absolutely horrifying, and it does the world building job of like, taint is like bad and dangerous. It's like the one redeeming part of the hospital, in my opinion, and even then it's like you could have relayed this world building detail to us in a way that didn't take up 2 chapters.
Yeah, really. If I could just stop you there real quick. That's my general takeaway for all of Volume 4. A lot of it is pointless. A lot of it is pointless fluff, but there's also a lot of really cool world building, and K-Cat takes a lot of opportunities to sprinkle breadcrumbs here and there about the world and the story, and setting up later plot points.
Yeah, it kind of feels sometimes like the flavor text in an RPG rulebook, just kind of put together as a story.
Yeah.
Where like the main purpose is not telling a story and telling characters, but showing off the world. And it's like
it's like those like little splat pages that they have in each section in a Pathfinder book.
Yeah, except we also have to put up with like multiple pages of Pip talking about her feelings again at the top of every chapter. The story is. It's a very long story, and it seems to like get longer as it goes on later, like Homestuck. And we're just kind of reaching we mentioned the story about like, I remember how we got onto Zenith, which is just like there's these nuggets of characterization that are just kind of stuck in the swamp of details that is this part of the story, and there's just all kinds of these things getting lost, and it only gets worse as the volume goes on, because Canterlot is just
it's a fucking mess.
It's a deluge of piles of narrative payoff that was just for attention. Along with a whole load of other random clutter that doesn't matter, and we have no way of telling which is which, just because there's just so much of it. I know K-Cat uses Chekhov's gun as a just in commentary about the story, just talking about the the planting and payoff, and I feel like K-Cat is misusing that, because what they're really talking about is planting and payoff.
Yes.
Because the principle of Chekhov's gun is it's the literal like definition of it is like if you put a gun on the stage in the first scene of play, then in the second scene it should go off. The idea of that isn't like the key part of that isn't planting and payoff. It's economy of detail. It's that you don't put shit in the story that doesn't matter because it's distracting. It's and like
Yeah, and I think it's made worse though, definitely in the Canterlot chapter, by the fact that Pip starts off with, "I made sure to cut out parts," and I'm like, "Bitch, you didn't.
Yeah.
You lying little shit. You did not cut anything out. The only parts you cut out is you taking a leak."
And it's like what I mentioned with the or what you mentioned with the audio logs. It's just having like A and B and C plots, and we're all just jumping around, and also like the scene to scene transitions between them are at very weird times sometimes as well. This is something I mentioned way back in podcast 1, how she rescues Derpy off screen. We just kind of Yeah, it's a hot mess.
Yeah, it's I
All of us had a moment of silence.
I never liked. Oh yeah, it's there's a lot of Chekhov's gun in Fallout Equestria. It's like, no, it's not Chekhov's gun. It's as you said, it's setting up and payoff.
Yeah.
Which I think is good storytelling, because it's it gives a lot of details and a lot of world building to the story, but it can be very distracting at times when you have all of these little details sprinkled throughout the story. Some of them don't go anywhere.
Well, yeah, that's just thing. It's like if it's a if it's a plot detail that doesn't go anywhere, then it's not Chekhov's gun. It's the opposite of Chekhov's gun. It's Chekhov's Nerf gun.
Chekhov's nurse gun. But, well, and I think the other thing with the payoff and details is, like, the way that everything gets crammed together, like, she planned on finishing the story in, like, volume 5, and yet it feels like the way everything has been crammed together is that it was, we might have a cancellation at season 4, so, better, like, resolve all these plot arcs?
Yeah. Well, it's
and then randomly remember that the series is continuing.
I mean, that would be great if they were actually being resolved and not just kind of taken a tour through. It's like because there's stuff that just like it's a sort of a setup with no payoff, or a payoff with no setup. It's like Velvet when they're in Old Olney, Velvet just kind of randomly sings at a really high note, and this scares away the hellhounds, and it's just like. How long could you have remembered that you could do that earlier, or did you just do this randomly and it happened to what's going on here? I don't think that's ever explained.
Randomly happens and it works. In which again, like at that point it feels like then we've got ponies striking things on a typewriter and hoping to get
I have no. So Velvet sings to drive away the hellhounds. And there's no setup to this, and there's also no setup to Calamity just conveniently knowing about this hospital in Old Olney.
That strikes me as like more plausible, because like he's been topside for a while. He'll probably has some local knowledge. Velvet, because like it's not like Velvet like pulls this out the first time that they encounter a hellhound, having like maybe read about it or just kind of using general knowledge about animals. She does this like in a huff when they're arguing in the middle of a fight, having at like several like encounters through Old Olney. Like she doesn't break this out at the start. She just does it like just somewhere in the middle of the chapter.
Yeah. Just a quick note on Pip and Co.'s journey into Old Olney. I just want to say I agree with Little Pip's strategy of taking pot shots at the hellhounds from a distance, because that's exactly what I did in New Vegas in Quarry Junction. That's really the best method to take care of them.
I have more notes about that strategy conversation in the Velvet Remedy section later. But
we'll put a pin on that.
Yeah, we'll put a pin in that. Like the what was it? There was as I click my fingers here, trying to remember the thing with the Enclave mind control thing. Does that go anywhere?
Yes, that comes up in like one of the last chapters.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So
I mean,
I guess we're reviewing right now.
I guess it would be even more confusing if it never paid off.
Yeah.
but also, we're just kind of getting back into the thing of the story being such a swamp of details that stuff like this just gets lost. Like, one of the things I complained about in the prose section, by the way, how drunk are you?
Well, you dumped all of your complaints at the very beginning, and I couldn't keep up, so I only took like 2 shots. Okay,
that's okay. Good, because I was just kind of like half expecting you just have like chugged half the bottle just for anyway. The one of the things I complained about was the it just whenever some of the callbacks, not all of the callbacks, some of the callbacks just kind of K-Cat just quotes the line that is being called back to like it's a children's show. Which, yeah, I guess this is being written in season 1 and a lot of kind of but ordinarily that would just be kind of annoying. It's you feel kind of idiot when reading the story too. But the story is so long and packed with detail that it actually becomes necessary to keep track of everything, or to like make sure that everyone's still on the same page.
Honestly, I personally, especially, okay, this is one of the things, one of the very few things I like about Volume 4 is, like, now all of these individual pieces are starting to come together, and Little Pip is starting to finally form the overall image of this puzzle she's been piecing together this whole time. And I love it when there are those callbacks in her memory of things she's heard and things she's seen, because it's a narrative way of doing it when you're in a movie and there's like an echo of a line spoken previously, and like, oh, now that makes sense. So I personally love K-Cat doing that.
Yeah, I guess it's just I'm not. I guess it's just a question of technique and when it's appropriate to do that, because I feel like doing that is just kind of the opposite of subtle, and there are times when you don't want to be subtle. So
yeah, honestly, it reminds me a bit of the first Sherlock Holmes movie near the end, where like he's having this epiphany and he's putting all the pieces together in his mind, and there are these flashbacks to earlier scenes.
Oh yeah, I mean
and he's putting it all together.
That definitely makes sense, because he's a detective, and the point of the movie is a detective movie.
Yeah,
and it's like the alternative is just we sit at we watch Sherlock just kind of standing there, putting everything together in his head, and then running off to do something. And then we've got BBC's Sherlock.
Before season 4.
Well, I mean, yeah, because that once we get to season 4, he's just not thinking and just doing.
Yeah. God, I fucking hate season 4 of Sherlock. Anyways.
Anyone else have anything to say about structure? Because I've said a bunch. It's kind of rambled into. It's spilled into other topics. But.
Horse, I would say you're the most knowledgeable on story structure, because most of my notes are about the meta narrative of the story itself and criticizing that. So if you have nothing else on story structure, I think we can move on to any other talking points.
Yeah, I don't really have too much on structure other than I mostly it's just mirroring what you said. Is that it would have been, again, reminding ourselves that this was written in 8 months, which considering that the Ministries chapter is like basically a novel in itself.
Yeah, it's
it's one of those things that in actual editing passes, it probably would have been best to go through and remind ourselves that brevity is godliness.
Yeah. It's and I know I've said this a few times in the podcast already, but I'm just going to say it again because I think it's really relevant right now. Volume 4 is just terribly bloated with a lot of unnecessary bullshit. The whole point of Volume 4 is to go to Canterlot and get the Black Book, but it's predicated on such contrived nonsense and unnecessary distractions.
Yeah. It's like we just kind of end up in this rabbit hole of so it's like I can see from a setup point of view, it's like okay, we need to go to Canterlot. We're gonna make a plan to Canterlot. Part of it involves extracting my memories, so I'm gonna leave an instruction list for myself. We're gonna follow that. I like that setup. That has potential, and they get constantly distracted. We just end up in this the list itself is actually very short, but they get to point 2 is okay, we're going to Canterlot, so we need steel hooves, and then steel hooves needs something, and then we get we get distracted from that thing by another thing, and get distracted from that thing by another thing, and look where we are. We're in Eradicator Sanctuary. How did this happen?
Yeah.
Oh, it's like how you end up feeling like when you play Fallout 4 and
Yeah.
you're like, you know,
It's
40 hours into the game and you're like, wait, what am I doing again?
Yeah.
Oh, right, my child.
it's like
I forgot about the baby.
that's fine for a game.
God, some
but-
mothers leave them in hot cars. I just kind of forgot about the fact that they existed because I got too busy, you know, playing The Sims with the wasteland.
Yeah, I think
Sorry.
we've got the bases covered in structure.
Yeah.
That's a good place to leave it.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, don't when you're adapting Fallout, don't adapt the gameplay rhythms of Fallout.
Yeah, really.
They're not compelling reading.
Yeah.
No.
So, next on the docket is now that we've had our fun little poke at that, let's talk about Glyphmark.
Yes, Glyphmark. So again,
And,
they're on their way to Canterlot. Okay, we're going into Canterlot. We're gonna get the Black Book. We're gonna go in and out. But then we get attacked by Bloodwings, and then we see zebras, and now we have to get involved in this situation now.
Which, to be fair with that one did kind of make some
Yeah.
sense because it was like, hey, we're trying to rescue Xena's kid.
Yeah.
So at least there's like this vague sort of reason behind it.
It's as digressions go, it's not like it's one of the less egregious ones, and having a base camp for Canterlot makes a lot of sense. What I wanted to talk about is this is where we get into fantastic racism, or fantastical racism.
Oh, good. I'm not the only one that said zebra racism.
Yeah.
This is wow.
So doing race in fantasy is always kind of weird and fraught. I feel like the show in season 1 did this kind of clumsily because it's like we have our opener, we have our unicorns, our Pegasi, our Earth Ponies. That's all well and good. We've got our 3 tribes, they get along, and blah 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 blah. Then we get to episode 11. We introduce Sakura, and Sakura has all this African shorthand. And suddenly, the context of everything changes because it's like if and we have like the buffalo later in the season as well, and they've got like Native American shorthand. It's very strange that I have many complaints about that we will not get into. But I've got your fucking number, Dave Polsky. Having like this shorthand sort of recontextualizes ponies as it's like if zebras are African and buffalo are Native American, then what are ponies? Well, I guess they're European, and that gets a little weird when you realize that ponies are, by the nature of the fiction, the caretakers of the world. Do you see what I mean when I talk about like you have to be careful when you think about themes?
Yeah.
Like if you don't think about this stuff, it just creeps in by accident.
The Pegasi are pretty much an XP for the Greeks and the Romans.
I mean, yeah. There's that too. I mean, like they are. I mean, that stuff can. Yeah. Like there's the Greeks and Romans, and there's like the Canterlot, Camelot. Yeah. Fallout Equestria actually kind of it sort of improves on this by just changing what the shorthand for zebras is to like Roman stuff. We've got Kaiser, and there's just like a bunch of random other stuff like martial
Well, that's
arts
just
and
New
cosmic
Vegas
horror.
implementing.
I mean, it's still kind of exotic mystery stuff, and it's a little wibbly and like, but I'm not quite sure what I'm expecting from people writing in 2011 about this in a fan fiction.
Well, but still though, like realistically, like looking through that section, like one of my comments that I made about it is that holy shit is like, does Midnight Showers have this like, oh god, this might be a reference that would make sense more to basic than you horse is looking at the differences between like northern and southern racism in the United States.
That doesn't.
Oh, good. You do know it. Okay, good, sweet. But basically, like, there's just this extremely like northern style racism that comes out of him that just bugs the shit out of me because like with all the contextual cues that we're given in the show and that sort of thing, and you know that's the what are you actually saying here moments that we have with this is that the entire his analysis of zebras and their culture was kind of a gut punch for me, honestly, because like I've heard similar statements.
I thought Midnight Shower was a girl.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. I thought it was a guy, but maybe I'm wrong.
It doesn't matter, sorry.
It's not amazingly relevant now.
Regardless, the point is that I've heard this, a lot of his viewpoints and the things, the way that he talks about culture of other, it was disgustingly reminiscent of social workers I did not get along with working in the inner city in Portland. Especially when we were dealing with minority populations, because there's this like air of like weird like pity that he has, like look at the poor savages, but like it's at the same time it's like, well, but they're like that because they're not us. And I've always hated that because it's one of those things where you end up not really being someone where they are. And so, but it was one of those points that, you know, and then you have the continuation. But it's interesting the way that you know, obviously, when you're making commentaries on race and culture and that sort of thing in any sort of work, you know, again, like you said, 2011, what sort of commentaries are people going to be making? Probably, maybe they could be, but that's up for debate, honestly. But
it's like being a white supremacist with a guilty conscience.
I mean, yeah, that's that's a surprising amount of that's more common than you might think.
Well, and I think that's the other side of it is that it's that part of like. How do I put this without getting into like intersectionality?
No, let's get into it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
God, I hate these topics because they make me angry.
All right, section.
But rip that. But anyway, but no, basically, like what you're starting to run into is that it's like I think that your description there, basic, is actually kind of apt because in a lot of ways, you're right. It's that, you know, it's like feeling bad for being a white supremacist, but you're not feeling bad about it at the same time. Because like I think in some ways there's also, from looking at it from like a positionality perspective, Midnight Shower recognizes that like they have advantages and that there's certain like basically privileges that they have being obviously unicorn, part of the dominant society and that sort of thing. But where they stop is their understanding of what that actually means and how that actually affects them and why the other people might be not treating them the same way. And so that's why like the entire scenes with like all the scenes with dealing with her or him, or I can't remember the gender of Midnight Shower, honestly, dealing with like the police and trying to get them and like having this like, well, I have this and I have this demand and you should just do this for me, and I'm like sitting here going like basically not understanding the point of power that they have over the minority zebra population that they have at that time. And it's just one of those things that, like, you know, it's when you don't understand what you're looking at, I think that there's definitely things that kind of show up that really get kind of really uncomfortable really quickly because I mean I have a few contrasts to bring up in depictions of racism, in that like Midnight Shower is I mean we're talking about like, yeah, this is super uncomfortable to read, but it's like kind of like that's the point, because Midnight Shower is I want to bring this up in contrast to media that has done racism in a very, very lazy way. For example, movies like Crash and Bright, where they sort of
they pin all of they pin the entirety of racism on like a few bad apples who are individually bad, and there is and there's another thing in relation to Bright that I'll bring up when I talk about like the Little Pip timeline, because race comes up there as well. But it's just like the mindset behind it, where you have people like blaming people for like things that happened a long time ago, or just having like reasons for it that are almost like they try to rationalize it instead of what racism tends to be, which is just kind of there's no it's an emotional response that is justified post hoc by things like, you know, the skull shape sort of thing, the phrenology, that's the one.
Phrenology.
Like pseudoscience like that. Whereas Midnight Shower is like, yeah, it kind of works this way, where it's like you just don't realize what you're doing. I will say my notes for this, I didn't go through them as thoroughly, so I feel like I'm just kind of waffling here. But related to the Little Pip timeline, that's where it starts to get a little screwier, because you still have people, you know, being racist against zebras, and it feels a little odd because this is like, I mean, I'm not saying it wouldn't happen. It would just happen differently. Like some of the like logistical consequences, but like, the reason why Glyphmark is where it is because Zebra Town was there, and yeah, you have a population of zebras, and also in the years immediately after the war, zebras probably would have been ostracized and just kind of forced to live in the worst place, and like that's why it is. However, 200 years have passed. I suppose that's kind of getting into like the world being in sort of stasis for 200 years.
Yeah. And also, it's also helped by Red Eye, because Stern's slavers also came through Zebra Town, and they just like left the colts and fillies of the Zebra Town because they didn't feel like they were fit to be re-educated.
That's a very recent thing, though.
Yeah.
Well, the other side of it. Well, I think though that though you know we're saying that this is something that exists in a vacuum, but the fact of the matter is that's not actually really the case if you think about it, because realistically we have different points of basically racist ideology that have existed largely unchanged.
Yeah.
For just several thousand years.
Oh yeah, I'm not
getting into like Japan.
Yeah, I'm not saying
their views on Koreans.
I'm not saying like, you know, 200 years pass and suddenly, you know, the racism against zebras goes away. You know, it's a little more stubborn than that. But it's just like the way people talk about it. It just reminded me of, there's a line in Bright where there's like one of the police officers. He is of Mexican extraction. And he has this throwaway line when they're like dealing with some kind of situation, as like I think it's "Don't look at me, Mexicans still get shit for the fucking Alamo," and it's like, that is not the way people talk about Mexicans. that is like some Hollywood writer in a bold of me to assume this movie had a writer. But basically, someone who does not know what they're talking about has tried to write this line, and there's like shades of that with some of the ways people talk about zebras in the Little Pip timeline, where they're still going on about the war instead of like more pressing concerns, like more modern stuff. Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, though, like too, I mean, I don't know.
No, go ahead.
Racism is dumb inherently, so like you know that there's also that aspect of it of like, well, my grandfather always hated them, so
yeah,
you know, that's kind of how it is.
Yeah, there is that.
Thanks, Kentucky. But
yeah. Oh boy, this topic is difficult.
Yeah, it is. It's
Oh no, like I want, like that was the thing is like I think we need to like kind of own that too. Is that like all of us are sitting here and I'm not gonna make any assumptions just because I think I've actually met you in person, Horse, but like Basic and I are both Caucasian. And I'm just I think the only thing that like we have as points of like not privilege is that we've both grown up in poverty.
Yeah.
So beyond that, we're like
I'm like probably like I'm like honestly probably the most privileged here, having I'm white, I'm Irish, and I did not grow up in poverty. So yeah, it's oh god, it's difficult to talk about this stuff because I just don't know. It's yeah.
But I mean, well, that's the thing is like speaking to experiences and stuff. Obviously, we can't have the same parallels, but it is an interesting. It's just a very interesting mix of reads that like were put into here, like where there's a lot of like real world analogs, but then also like you said, things like that, like comments like that in Bright, where you're like, I don't think anyone actually would see it that way, but okay.
Yeah, it's like we don't we don't blame the French for Napoleon still in that kind of way.
I mean, we could if we wanted to, but no. We don't.
Yeah. While we're on the subject of racism and the concept of a cartoon horse show, let's talk about Steel, who's pre-war racism in these logs with Midnight Shower.
This is
his racism is very interesting because he's sent to sort of police this town shortly after the assassination attempt on Princess Celestia by a zebra. And there comes a point in this C plot, let's say, where these I think these zebra it's Steel Hood's subordinates like sexually assaulting some zebra mare, and he like beats the hell out of his subordinates, not out of like support for the zebra, but out of this sense of inherent justice. But he still says, "Boy, I hate ziggers."
Yeah, that.
I mean,
God.
There's almost shades of like Japanese internment about the whole Zebra Town situation.
Yeah.
And it's god.
Well, let's. I've actually got this section pulled up. There and to think that this entire place was not even a concept not so long ago, but then there was no real need for segregation until the zebras massacred our children at Littlehorn.
Yeah.
Now,
I mean, there's also like the equation of race and nationality, which is sort of an unfortunate like inheritance from just the way fantasy races tend to work, where it's like all of the people of this, race or ethnicity or species all have the one country, and that's them, and that sort of identifies the actions of their leaders with all of them in a way that's a little like stronger from like a surface level read than it would be if, say, there was more than one zebra country, and then it just kind of allows people to blame individual random zebras in Equestria for the actions of a foreign government.
Well, which is interesting though, because like Basic was saying, that really pings of the Japanese internment during World War II.
Yeah.
And one of the other sides of that too is that like much like the Japanese internment during World War II, at one point the Midnight Shower says something along the lines of like how he's like talking about, well, in your homeland, and the zebras are like, bitch, I live here.
It's
Equestria is my home. What the fuck are you on?
It's like, oh my god. To keep it vaguely lighthearted in this trying time. It's like people asking Irish Americans about like Irish mythology, and it's just like What? I mean, I bring this up just because I've had odd experiences with Irish Americans where, like, when they realise they're Irish from Ireland, I can look out my window and see Ireland. They say, "I'm
sheep?
Irish."
It's,
I'm
green and pretty.
I'm in town. There's only
Okay.
one Jeep. They say, "I'm Irish too," and it's just like.
no, you're not.
not in a way that like matters to most of. I mean, it can matter to you as far as like cultural heritage goes, but like only what has been told to you by your family. There is nothing about you might have nothing to do with it with Ireland. And
Which actually, I think is a kind of a uniquely American perspective, because you really don't see that with other nations. Like, the U.S. is like, well, I'm American, but
yeah,
because most of us, like most of the, at least the European and Caucasian populations are concerned, have actually all of them, all of the Caucasian populations concerned, we've emigrated here from somewhere. Be it Ireland or Italy or England, or in the case of my family, most of Eastern Europe, after, engaging in horse thievery, cuckoldry, and then sometimes horse thievery and cuckoldry at the same time. My ancestors are Roma, if that makes any sense, and I really wish that they weren't stereotypical Roma. But if you pick every bad stereotype you have about that particular group of travelers, that was my family, and we've thus continued it since then, including my aunt burning down her house.
Oh, damn, okay.
Every time I'm like, my mom was like, "No, we're Swedish," and my grandmother was like, "No, we come from the Roma," and I'm like, could we not be bad racial stereotypes, because there's other things that are parts of this culture that we could be.
Yeah, but yeah,
but basically,
yeah.
I
I just see what you mean about like because obviously we have immigration to Europe as well, and we do have like minority populations. It's different in that it's not most of people, but also you get this thing where after a while, people don't like. It is like not as much of a thing as in America, where you just like hold on to that idea of like another nationality from multiple generations. It's like it's like you have like say like third generation Pakistani British people, and they're like, I'm English, I'm just English,
It's called assimilation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like their culture isn't gone, but it's like they would introduce themselves as English.
Right, exactly. It's like the cultural identity. I mean, obviously your culture is still there, but yeah, like what Basic was saying with assimilation is you assimilate into the dominant culture and go, well, this is what I am. I may have some practices that aren't necessarily dominant culture because I'm still part of the minority population. However, at the same time, I'm this is my identity.
Yeah. So it's just like so now I'm just like imagining it's like Midnight Shower, just like going up to like Sadiq Khan or someone, just and just being like, hey, what's going on in Pakistan? And he's just like, what are you talking about? So yeah, I can see why Midnight Shower got a frosty reception.
Yeah, well, because then that's basically what she was doing, and like, I mean, and unfortunately, like again, the parallels to what happened in the U.S. during World War II with the Japanese is that's how it was. Is that unfortunately, like, you had people that would be like, well, I can't believe that you're doing this.
It's like
and then you have Japanese soldiers that are like, yeah, it's kind of shitty that those people did that. Good thing I'm an American. Flat.
Oh boy.
Diving
we have...
a bit. Oh, sorry. Do you have something else?
Oh, I was just gonna ask if we had more to cover on this topic, but you were about to jump in.
Yes, yeah. I was gonna say, diving a bit more into Steelhooves' disposition towards.
Oh yeah,
This
because
is
we were going to talk about Steelhooves, and we've just been talking about Midnight Shower. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
This is a good jumping point to get into his disposition towards zebras, not only in the pre-war timeline with Midnight Shower, but also the Apple memory board that they put. Which, I mean, Steelhooves, to me, other than Calamity, is the most fascinating character in the story, disbarring his casual racism of zebras.
Is it really casual?
It's not really casual. It's
Guys,
a very fiery
Midnight had a.
it's a very
I just thought I'd ask that.
Yeah.
You know.
It's a very fiery hatred of zebras.
Yeah. Like when they first rescue Zenith, he is not comfortable with her at all.
Yeah. Which is interesting that he's held on to this prejudice for 200 years without once being challenged on it.
Yeah, well, I mean,
his entire life.
I mean, Equestria is probably not the most challenge. It's not an environment that's going to naturally challenge his assumptions about zebras very much.
Yeah.
You've got all this, they didn't exactly send someone around after the bombs to clear up all the propaganda.
Yeah. But I do love the memory orb where he kills Zecora. I don't enjoy Steelhooves killing Zecora, but I love just how angry he gets, and he hints at how betrayed he felt, because he was on this path of trying to open up his heart and his mind to accepting zebras, and even alludes to the fact that he was there when Zecora came to Applejack's house and they shared a table at dinner together.
Yeah, it does feel like he was on the road to learning and growing, and then this misunderstanding just kind of threw all that in the bin.
And it's because of that I just love Steelhooves and how damaged he is, and how you allow. This is something I relate to a lot. It is the burning, blind anger when it comes to a misunderstanding, and then feeling great regret afterwards, because it's. I think it was at some point in Volume 4, Little Pip admits to Steelhooves that, no, Zecora was never a traitor. She was contracted by the Ministry of Awesome and Morale to be a spy. And then,
she's trying to get close to the Kaiser.
Yep, and once Pip tells him that, he goes really quiet, taking that in, and there's not a whole lot of insight into what goes through his mind, but his silence is very telling.
It's that glorious, precious substance that is so hard to find in the story.
Yeah.
Subtext.
And that's exactly why I love Steelhooves, because of how well K-Cat handles his inner turmoil without alluding to it too much, but without being too, without beating you over the head with it. I should say.
It's we're allowed to stew on it. What is he thinking? It's had a lot to think about.
At times it's very hard to read Steelhooves because he is a fanatic stoicist.
I mean, I guess that yeah. I suppose I'm just complaining about how everything else is so over-explained that it's just oh wow, someone who actually gives me room to breathe about thinking. And then Little Pip fills that void anyway. God damn, will you shut up?
Right.
But yeah,
No, yeah, you're saying?
No, I think I was just gonna have a tangent point about how the presence of ghouls also just kind of complicates the whole race discussion, because you do actually have people who were alive 200 years ago and were racist as shit 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's well, how much has their opinion changed?
Yeah, it's.
I guess Steelhooves is our test case for that.
Yeah. And still those racism about ghouls is also very overcompensating about his hatred, which I think he puts up as a front to mostly to gauge other people's thoughts on what they think about ghouls. And that's really all I have to say on that.
Yeah.
I was hoping some of you might say something, but if you don't, that's fine.
It's a possibility.
Yeah.
I suppose I hadn't been thinking that much about ghouls this volume, just because there's just so much other stuff to cover.
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever actually talked about like sexuality in relation to the story, and I don't know if it has any reason to ever actually come up.
No.
I think the closest that we've ever actually come up with that with sexuality is honestly me bitching about the fact that I would never be friends with Velvet because she's a terrible pony, and honestly she lost any and all respect that I had for her when she was queerbaiting Pip because Calamity was dirty.
Yeah.
Okay, so
But I had.
we'll get. Okay, so basically on our playbill here, we've got Canterlot and Velvet Remedy left. Which do we want to tackle first? Because the other one we're going to be finishing on.
Actually, now that it's come up, I want to talk about sexuality because
Okay.
I
we
think
can cover it briefly. Yeah.
personally, I think the only matter in which sexuality can come up in this story is Little Pip's sexuality in terms of being a lesbian, because Heartshine and I both agree that Calamity and Little Pip would make a far better couple than Pip and Homage and Velvet and Calamity. And you disagree with that, and I'm wondering if it's because you adhere to Little Pip being a lesbian. Is that why?
I mean, it's I mean, I not something I've put a massive amount of thought into. I guess it's difficult to figure out, who would actually be, I'm trying to think, because when I think about, who would settle down well, it's like, who would be good for her in terms of, like, relationship chemistry and, like, a long-term partner thing. I don't...
So assuming the entire party is a bunch of bisexual disaster kleptomaniacs, which they kind of are already.
Yeah.
Just the bisexuality was the part that's a little bit nebulous at this point.
Yeah. So, like, throw sexuality out the window. It's like, I don't... Like, the Pip and Calamity just feel kind of bro-ish. It's like they, I feel like they can amplify each other's worst tendencies sometimes. And I don't know if that's like... It feels like they don't, like, cover each other's bases quite right. I mean, that isn't to say that Pip does that with Homage. He definitely doesn't. That's not a relationship. That's a booty call.
Yeah, pretty much.
That entire relationship is highly.
Yeah.
Actually, I was talking with Roms about that and about how Homage's relationship with her is highly exploitative on the part of Homage.
Yeah, it kind of.
And
is.
it's like when he pointed that out, like that was something I hadn't thought about before, and then he mentioned it, and I was like, "Oh God, you're on point about that."
Yeah.
Like,
it's I mean, when you I mean, the whole thing about just, like, routinely embarrassing her on public radio is, like, she's just flexing on her in front of her. Like, that's... Oh, my God. No good, very bad idea.
It's not a very healthy relationship.
no.
But, like...
Well, I think, I know that, like, it sounds like you hadn't put a lot of thought in this first, but one of the things that I think that I thought about, and this is why, like I said, taking sexuality out of the equation and not having made Pip's orientation a focus, which, like I said, I don't mind that she's a lesbian. I appreciate that, and as someone who does my own share of butt staring and boob checking writing. Like, I get it. But, like, at the same time, well, you know, without looking at, like, actually, like, character dynamics and that sort of thing, like, honestly, like, the reason why I agree with Basic saying that, like, you know, Pip and Calamity were basically the Harry and Hermione that never happened and should have been, of this story was just because there's this really dumb romantic notion that we have that I don't know where it comes from, that opposites attract, and while in some ways they do, similarities actually tend to attract better in relationships and actually form longer lasting relationships for the most part.
I'm not saying you're like selling me on it, but you're but you are like making good points when you're thinking about this, and like how like Calamity and Velvet isn't a very like well thought out relationship either. It's not necessarily, you know, toxic in the same way that Pip and Homages is, but it is kind of he was a boy, she was a girl, and it's like there's not really much of a. Can it be any more obvious? Okay. It's
cut that out. Cut that out.
But it
I hate that I know that song. Thanks.
It does kind of there's a bit of the opposites attract, and there's a bit of the thing where it's a thing that people do when they're writing straight relationships, and they're not very good at writing relationships. That they just don't. They don't think about why people are attracted to each other, and they just kind of shove the boy and the girl together.